My name's Laura, and I never thought my life would get so crazy. I grew up in a normal family, nothing special. After college, I became a primary school teacher. It wasn't a fancy job, but I loved working with kids. Then everything changed when I met Larry. He was handsome, tall, dark hair, and had deep eyes you could get lost in. Plus, he was super rich. His parents owned a big company, and Larry was their favorite. We clicked right away. Larry said he liked how down-to-earth I was, and I thought that was sweet. Looking back, I should have noticed the warning signs. Our quick romance surprised everyone, especially his parents, who didn't like me from the start. I still remember the first time I met them. Larry's mom asked me in a rude tone, "What does your dad do?" I answered, "He's a plumber." The look on her face was like I had said something awful. Larry's dad wasn't much better. "Teaching, huh? Not exactly a moneymaker," he said. But Larry defended me. "I love Laura. You'll have to deal with it," he told them. We got married, even though his parents didn't approve. I moved into Larry's fancy apartment, feeling like Cinderella. Everything seemed perfect. I got pregnant quickly, and we had our son, Thomas. Larry's parents might have hated me, but they loved Thomas. Maybe they thought he'd turn out more like them. Life settled into a routine. Larry worked as a financial director at his dad's company, and I kept teaching and taking care of our home. It wasn't easy balancing work and taking care of Thomas, but I managed. One night, while putting Thomas to bed, Larry came home late again. "Another long day?" I asked. He just grunted, loosening his tie. "You wouldn't understand, Laura. It's complicated," he said. His words hurt, but I brushed it off. "Well, Thomas missed you. He wanted you to read him a bedtime story." Larry sighed. "I'm tired, Laura. Can't you do it?" As I watched him walk away, I had a bad feeling that something was changing between us. But I told myself we were happy this was the life, wasn't it? Over time, I couldn't ignore the growing distance between Larry and me. He was staying at work later, going out for dinners, and becoming more distant. I tried to tell myself it was just stress from work, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The turning point came when I found out about a company party. I was folding laundry when my mother-in-law called. "Laura," she said, her voice full of dislike, "I hope you're not planning to wear that awful green dress to the party tonight." I froze. "What party?" I asked. There was a pause. "The company's annual gala. Surely Larry told you." My heart dropped. "He must have forgotten," I said quietly. "Well," she replied, "maybe it's for the best. These events require sophistication, and we all know you struggle enough with the basics of being a financial director's wife." I hung up, my face burning with embarrassment. When Larry came home, I confronted him. "Why didn't you tell me about the party?" I asked. He sighed, loosening his tie. "Look, Laura, these events aren't really your thing. You're just too—" He paused, looking for the right word. "Simple," I finished bitterly. He shrugged. "You said it, not me." That night, Larry left for the party in his tuxedo, and I sat alone in our big apartment, feeling more out of place than ever. In the weeks that followed, Larry grew even more distant. I focused on taking care of Thomas and my teaching job, trying to ignore the growing feeling of dread. One day, while cleaning Larry's office, I noticed his laptop was open. Curiosity got the best of me, and I started looking through it. What I found shattered my world. There, in black and white, was an email chain between Larry and someone named Angela. As I read, my hands shook. She wasn't just a coworker. "God, you were amazing last night," one email read. "Laura doesn't even compare." Angela replied, "Of course not, darling. She's just a simple little teacher. How could she possibly satisfy someone like you?" They mocked me, calling me a fool. I also found out Larry had been buying Angela expensive gifts, things I never received. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the screen with tears streaming down my face. Then I heard Larry's key in the door. I quickly closed the laptop and wiped my eyes. He walked in, smelling of expensive cologne. "Hey," he said, barely looking at me. I swallowed hard. "How was work?" I asked. "Fine," he muttered, heading for the shower. The next morning, I felt like everything had changed. I woke up early, my mind racing with everything I'd found out. Larry stumbled in around dawn, looking messy and smelling like alcohol. I pretended to be asleep as he collapsed onto the bed. When he finally woke up, I was ready. I had copied the emails onto a USB drive, which I held in my trembling hand. "Larry," I said, my voice surprisingly calm, "we need to talk." He groaned, rubbing his eyes. "What is it, Laura?" "I've got a killer headache." I plugged the USB into the TV and pulled up the emails. "Care to explain this?" Larry's eyes widened as he recognized the messages. Then, to my shock, he smirked. Well, he said slowly. "Looks like the simple little teacher did some snooping." "How could you?" I choked out, tears welling up. "I'm your wife, the mother of your child." He stood up, towering over me. "That's the problem, Laura. You're a wife and a mother. But Angela? She's exciting, sophisticated. She gives me things you never could." It felt like he'd slapped me. "So, what now? Are you leaving me for hers?" Larry laughed, a cold sound that made me flinch. "Leave you? Why would I?" "No, Laura, I'm going to keep seeing Angela, and you're going to put up with it." "Like hell I will," I spat, feeling a sudden rush of anger. He remained calm. "Yes, you will, because without me, what do you have? A teacher's salary? A tiny apartment? Face it, Laura, you need me." I stared at him, realizing that this man was a stranger to me. In that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. "No, Larry," I said quietly. "I don't need you. Not anymore." I grabbed Thomas, who was thankfully still asleep, and headed for the door. "Where do you think you're going?" Larry called after me. "To my parents," I shot back. "Don't try to stop me." As I drove away, Thomas stirring in his car seat, I felt both scared and free at the same time. I didn't know what the future would hold, but I knew one thing for sure. I was done being Larry's simple little teacher. When I arrived at my parents' modest house, tears streamed down my face. My mom opened the door, took one look at me and Thomas, and ushered us inside without saying a word. "Laura, sweetheart, what happened?" she asked once we were settled in the living room. Through sobs, I told them everything: the emails, the confrontation, Larry's cruel words. My dad's face darkened as I spoke. "I'll kill him," he growled, starting to stand up. "No, Dad," I said, grabbing his arm. "He's not worth it. I just need to figure out what to do next." My mom hugged me tightly. "You'll stay here, of course. We'll help you with Thomas, and we'll get you a good lawyer." That night, I lay in my old bed, with Thomas sleeping peacefully beside me. I knew this was just the start of a long, hard road, but for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I was free. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings with lawyers and sleepless nights. Larry, being Larry, wasn't going to let this go without a fight. He hired the best divorce lawyer in town and seemed determined to make my life miserable. One afternoon, my lawyer, Olivia, a kind woman with a gentle smile, told me, "Larry is trying to get full custody of Thomas. He's saying you're an unfit mother." It felt like a punch to the stomach. "What? How can he say that?" Olivia sighed, adjusting her glasses. "He's claiming you're unstable and that you've neglected Thomas. It's all lies, of course, but we need to be ready for a tough fight." And tough it was. Larry threw every accusation at me. He said I was mentally unstable, that I cheated on him, that I was a danger to Thomas. Every lie felt like a stab to my heart. The day of the custody hearing came, and I sat in the courtroom, my hands shaking as Larry's lawyer painted me as a bad mother. "Your Honor," he said, pretending to be concerned, "Mrs. Parker is clearly unfit to care for a child. She left the marital home without Mr. Parker's consent and took their son. She's unstable, prone to emotional outbursts." I wanted to scream that it was all lies, but Olivia had trained me well. I sat still, keeping my face calm. When it was our turn, Olivia stood up. "Your Honor, my client is a devoted mother and a respected teacher. Mr. Parker's claims are baseless and cruel. We have character witnesses." The judge listened to both sides, his face giving nothing away. Finally, he spoke. "After reviewing all the evidence, I find no reason to deny Mrs. Parker custody of Thomas. Mr. Parker will have visitation rights and will pay alimony and child support. I let out a sob of relief. Larry's face twisted in anger, but I didn't care. I had won. Thomas was staying with me. As we left the courthouse, Larry grabbed my arm and hissed, "This isn't over, Laura. I'll make you regret this." I pull my arm away. "No, Larry, it is over. You lost. Deal with it." I walked away, my head held high, feeling stronger than I had in years. But I knew Larry wouldn't give up easily, and I had to be ready for whatever he might try next. Months passed and life slowly found a new normal. I threw myself into my teaching job, treasuring every moment with Thomas and slowly rebuilding my confidence. But Larry wasn't finished with us yet. One Friday afternoon, while I was helping my mom prepare dinner, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, I found Larry standing there, with a stunning blonde woman on his arm. "Laura," he said, in a voice that sounded too sweet, "I've come to see Thomas. This is Angela, my fiancée." It felt like I'd been hit in the stomach. "Fiancée?" I managed to say. Angela smirked as she looked around our modest home. "Yes, Larry and I are getting married. Now, where's the little one? I can't wait to meet him." I wanted to slam the door, but for Thomas's sake, I knew I had to stay calm. "Come in," I said through clenched teeth. As they entered, Angela wrinkled her nose. "What a quaint little place you have here," she said with a mocking tone. My parents, who had come to see what was going on, were clearly upset by her words. My dad started to speak. "Now listen here, young lady," but Larry interrupted. "No need to get upset. We're all adults here, aren't we?" "Well, some of us more than others," he added, looking at my parents with contempt. That was it. "Get out," I said, my voice low and firm. "Excuse me?" Larry asked, surprised. "You heard me," I replied, my anger growing. "Get out of my parents' house. You can see Thomas another time when you learn some respect." Angela laughed, a high, irritating sound. "Oh, honey, don't you understand? Larry doesn't need your permission. He has rights, you know." I stepped closer, my voice quiet but firm. "And I have the right to kick you out of this quaint house, as you called it. Now leave, before I call the police." Larry's face darkened. "You'll regret this, Laura. I'll take Thomas away from you. Just wait and see." That night, after putting Thomas to bed, I sat with my parents in the living room, my head in my hands. "What am I going to do?" I asked, my voice shaking. "He's going to try to take Thomas away. I just know it." My mom put her arm around me. "We won't let that happen, sweetheart. We'll fight him every step of the way." My dad nodded, his face determined. "I've got an idea," he said. "Remember Charles, your old school friend who became a private detective?" I nodded, unsure where he was going with this. "Well," he continued, "maybe it's time we did some digging of our own. Let's see what secrets Larry and his new fiancée are hiding." I hesitated. It felt wrong to sink to Larry's level. But then I thought of Thomas and the threat of losing him. I knew I had to do whatever it took to protect him. "Okay," I said, taking a deep breath, "let's do it. Let's hire Charles." The next day, I called Charles. We hadn't spoken in years, but when I explained the situation, he agreed to meet right away. We met at a small cafe, far from curious eyes. "Laura," Charles said, giving me a warm hug, "I'm so sorry you're going through this." I told him everything about the affair, the divorce, and Larry's threats. Charles listened carefully, his brow furrowed. "I'll take the case," he said. "We'll find out what Larry and his fiancée are really up to." Over the next few weeks, Charles worked nonstop. I tried to focus on teaching, caring for Thomas, and helping my parents, but I couldn't stop checking my phone for updates. Finally, one day, Charles called. "Laura, you need to come to my office right now." When I arrived, Charles looked serious. "I've found some things," he said, "and they're not good." He laid out a series of documents and photos. "First, your ex's fiancée, Angela, isn't who she says she is. Her real name is Angela Davis, and she used to work as an escort." I gasped. "Are you sure?" Charles nodded. "Positive. But that's not all. She's been involved in corporate espionage, leaking information from your in-laws' company to their competitors." My head was spinning. Does Larry know? I don't think so, Charles replied. But there's more. Larry himself has been embezzling from the company. He's been stealing money for years. I sat back, stunned. This was way bigger than I had imagined. What do I do with this information? I asked. Charles leaned forward. That's up to you, Laura. But if I were you, I'd use it to protect yourself and Thomas. As I left Charles's office, my mind was racing. I had the power to ruin Larry and Angela, or Angela. But was that really what I wanted? The next day, I got an unexpected call. It was my mother-in-law. Laura, she said, her voice cold, we're having a small gathering for my birthday next weekend. We'd like you and Thomas to come. After hanging up, I felt a mix of anticipation and dread. The information Charles had uncovered was burning in my mind. I knew that at this party, I'd have to decide whether to use it or not. I looked at a photo of Thomas on my nightstand, his innocent smile beaming at me. Don't worry, sweetheart, I whispered. Mommy's going to keep you safe. With that thought, I started to plan. The party was just days away, and I had to be ready for anything. Larry and Angela wouldn't know what hit them. The day of my mother-in-law's birthday party finally arrived. I dressed Thomas in his best clothes and wore a simple but nice dress myself. As we drove to the fancy house I used to call home, my stomach churned with nerves. The welcome wasn't friendly. My mother-in-law gave me a cold look. Laura, she said sharply, we only invited you because you're Thomas's mother. Don't forget that. I swallowed my pride and nodded. I understand. Thank you for including us. The party was in full swing, with high society chatter filling the house. I stood in a corner, feeling out of place, while Thomas played with his cousins. Suddenly, the room went quiet. Larry had entered with a beautiful woman on his arm. My heart sank as I realized it was Angela. Everyone, Larry announced, smiling, I'd like you to meet my fiancée, Angela. We're getting married next month. The room burst into cheers, and my in-laws rushed to hug Angela. Oh, darling, my mother-in-law gushed. We're so happy. You're just the kind of woman Larry needs, so well-educated and from a good family. She glanced at me, making it clear that, unlike Angela, I wasn't good enough for their son. Something snapped inside me. I stood up, holding the folder Charles had given me. Actually, I said loudly, I have something to say. The room went silent, and all eyes turned to me. This woman, I said, my voice steady, is not who she says she is. Her real name is Angela Mills, and she's using her cousin's identity. She has no real education and used to work as an escort. Gasps filled the room, and Angela's face went pale. I wasn't finished. But that's not all. She's been leaking confidential information about your company to competitors. My father-in-law's face turned red. Is this true? He demanded. And Larry, I added, turning to my ex-husband, has been stealing money from the company for years. Chaos erupted. Larry lunged at me, but guests held him back. You lying scum, he yelled. My father-in-law's voice boomed over the noise. Enough. He turned to Angela. Get out of my house. I'll see you in court. As Angela ran out, he looked at Larry. You're fired. How dare you bring this woman into our family and steal from us? You're a disgrace. In the middle of all the chaos, my in-laws came over to me. My father-in-law spoke, his voice gruff. Laura, we owe you an apology. You saved our company. We were wrong about you. I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. Thank you, but I need to take my son home, I said, as I gathered Thomas and left the house. Behind us, the sounds of arguing continued, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. The truth was out, and we could finally move on. In the weeks after that dramatic night at my in-laws' party, life sped up. The fallout was fast and serious. Angela, was arrested for fraud and corporate spying. Seeing her led away in handcuffs was surreal. Larry didn't fare much better. His embezzlement was exposed, and he lost both his job and his fancy apartment. The last I heard, he moved to another state, his tail between his legs. He still calls Thomas sometimes, but the conversations are short and awkward. To my surprise, my relationship with my in-laws completely changed. They were truly sorry for how they had treated me. As a way to thank me for saving their company, they gave me a small apartment. "It's the least we can do, Laura," my father-in-law said as he handed me the keys. "We were wrong about you, and we're sorry." The apartment wasn't big or fancy, but it was ours. Thomas and I moved in, ready to start our new life. I threw myself back into teaching, finding joy in the simplicity of my work. Our life became calm and steady, free from the drama and stress we had been living with for so long. But that's not the end of the story. Remember Charles, my detective friend? After everything settled down, we started talking more often. He had been my support through the whole ordeal, helping me move and offering a shoulder to lean on. One day, as we were unpacking boxes in my new apartment, Charles picked up a framed photo and paused. "You know, Laura," he said softly, "you deserve so much better than what Larry put you through." I looked up and met his warm brown eyes. Something shifted between us in that moment. We began spending more time together, and our friendship slowly grew into something more. Charles was everything Larry wasn't: kind, caring, and he adored Thomas. Our first date wasn't anything fancy, just a picnic in the park with our kids. Charles has a son, William, who's a year younger than Thomas. The boys got along right away, chasing each other around the playground while Charles and I talked. I couldn't remember the last time I laughed that much. As we watched the kids play, I told Charles how happy I felt. He smiled and took my hand. "You deserve to laugh, Laura. You deserve to be happy." As weeks turned into months, Charles became a regular part of our lives. He was there for Thomas's first soccer game, cheering louder than anyone. He helped Thomas with his science project, patiently building a model of the solar system together. One night, after putting the boys to bed, we sat on my small balcony. Charles turned to me, his voice serious. "Laura, I want you to know that I'm here for the long run. You and Thomas aren't just a passing part of my life. I love both of you." Tears welled up in my eyes. "We love you too, Charles. You and William have made our lives feel complete again." As we sat there, holding hands and watching the stars, a sense of peace washed over me. For the first time in years, I felt truly happy. Life wasn't perfect, we still had challenges ahead, but with Charles by my side, and our boys becoming closer every day, I knew we could face anything that came our way. That night, as I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't help but smile. My story wasn't over, it was just the beginning of a beautiful new chapter.